Hello and welcome to the WS podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski, I'll be your host for today. And before we begin, may I just remind you, if you find this podcast entertaining and useful, please make sure to follow, subscribe, whichever, suits your platform, and share it with a friend, get the word out there. This is the best way to share, to spread the word, to let the podcast to grow. And it helps me, it makes my life easier in that regard, and as much as I enjoy doing it anyway, so I will obviously if you think this is something useful, then it's only fair and great if you could give me a hand in that regard, because word of mouth is by far, I would say so, the best of advertisements these days. People really like to know that someone else appreciates something before they give it a try. So, on that note, if you'd like to support the podcast in any other way, please follow the link below, and there are many options for you to choose. Otherwise, apart from that, thank you so much for all of you who are supporting, sending me emails, comments as well, and just kind words, and for all of you who are listening. This is an amazing adventure, as I said, so I'm here for the long run. Now, in terms of today's episode, I'm afraid it's not gonna get easier than the one the week before. As I said, I've prepared a list of 10 fiction books that I will share with you throughout this season. And I have chosen these books in particular because of their applicability to our real world and real world scenarios, or even more so, real world events. Literally, what has happened or what might happen if we were not cautious about our choices into the future. So last week we've talked about basically the idea behind totalitarian state, and potentially in what ways the algorithms or ramping up control of the government could lead us down the path of what George Orwell described in 1984 fiction book. Now, today we will turn our gaze to another one of his books. I've chosen it on purpose, in particular because I feel like it actually ties in nicely with what we've talked about last week, and I thought we might as well continue with the same author for the time, especially if you've enjoyed George Orwell's 1984, then I would definitely recommend you check out this book as well. Many of you probably read it during your education at school. I know I did, but it, of course, educational system change and changes in general, and so I don't know, maybe your country, your school, whatever, did not choose to talk about it. And the book is obviously The Animal Farm. So in turn, instead of talking about the dystopian future potential of totalitarian state, we will discuss a few themes as per usual, without spoiling too much of the book. I will share some quotes, but these quotes out of context are only useful for the purpose of this discussion. They don't actually spoil your adventure of reading the book yourself. Nevertheless, they're useful for us here today. And this in particular, this book, I think, treats and addresses from a fictional standpoint a non-fictional fact of how communism and the ideology of communism can truly turn sour. We've already discussed Gulag Archipelago on our podcast, and so I've put the link below for this particular episode. I think if after this episode and after reading Animal Farm, you're still somewhat convinced that there is a glimmer of hope for communist approach to be taken forth in your maybe in your country, or maybe in your local area, whatever, then I would encourage you to turn and face the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn as a truly horrific account, a real life account of living through the Soviet oppression, the Soviet state. And so, as I said, these topics are not easy. I'm afraid this is not really the kind of episode that you will enjoy if you're looking for a light-hearted conversation. Nevertheless, I think they are more important than ever before. And as we will explore in the coming weeks as well, we will approach all kinds of dystopian potential futures and explore some topics that, quite frankly, seem to emerge again and again on our cultural and political stage as if we forget. And we should not forget, right? We should not dismiss these facts, these horrific truths as something that, it happened before, but it won't happen again. And therefore, I know that I'm risking my reach with these episodes. I'm quite familiar with the idea that some of the platforms online don't really like to explore these concepts, and so that's fair enough. If that's the case, so be it. I don't particularly appreciate the fact that we seem to be wandering down the path that we cannot longer hold a true and open discussion about these topics. Nevertheless, I think it's only fair, and I know that Spotify at least is very friendly to creators in that regard. So I'm hoping the episode will not be taken down, and that you will be able to enjoy these discussions. So I've prepared 3 topics for you. I have some notes on screen as well as on in my notebook. And as I said, this time round we will explore the idea of maybe broadly the idea of how communism can turn sour, and at least this is the story that the book seems to describe in its undertones and in its sort of themes. When I read the book for the first time, I remember I was very young. I think it was in the secondary school, and as much as I kind of understood that there is an underlying theme going on, and we discussed it deeply as one can at school, in secondary school, simply because Poland was under the oppression of the Soviet Union for some time, and so the Poles seem to have this memory still quite remembered. I know my parents grew up in the Soviet under Soviet oppression, which it was fairly common among the generation before me and the generation before my parents to understand and appreciate the horrific nature of such state. Nevertheless, I've had to read it again, and luckily it was also made into a movie. I'm pretty sure there are some plays that are happening, so there are many ways you can appreciate this masterpiece by George Orwell without actually reading the book, if you want to explore other options. Of course, as always, this is the podcast is about getting yourself more informed, and I would say it's the best way if you get it from the horse's mouth. So if you can read the book or listen to the audiobook, then please do, if you've not yet. And if you have already, maybe when you were younger and you don't quite understand why are we talking here about communism, then please go back to that book, read it again, and maybe explore that topic deeper. My aim for this series is to shed a light, sort of point out what I think are some crucial themes among these stories that maybe someone that discussed the book with you could have done downplay or sort of omiss, or maybe you just didn't realize it at the time that that's the case. So let's begin. Our first theme is about this shift from equality to oppression that communism serves. It is the case in history as well. If you track the rise of the Soviet Union and the Soviet state, basically the Bolshevik Revolution and so forth, and similarly the revolution in China. Back in the day, these ideas usually start, and if you listen to some of the politicians out there who still, for whatever reason, which I cannot understand, maybe malice, seem to propagate these ideas, it always starts with the idea of equality. Unfortunately, we fall prey, I think we, meaning, an average Joe, such as myself, we tend to fall prey to ideas that sound good, that make us feel good, that make us feel right. And this is where, both dictatorships and all kinds of different states are sort of forged on. It's the best, the most efficient way of gathering a group of people and sort of making them do something they wouldn't do otherwise is to either force them or to motivate them, potentially by manipulating them. For example, by telling them that another group is worse than them, which is what we saw in the Third Reich in Hitler's Germany. Or by pointing out those that are successful and saying that those that are successful are the cause for your lack of success, which is what happened to the kulaks in the Soviet Union in the Bolshevik Revolution at the very beginning of the forming of the Soviet Union, right? So this communism idea of equality, everyone is equal, right? It always starts then that everyone is equal. But then over time, you can just see over the years that especially those that came up with this idea that everyone is equal are not actually equal to others. And, I would say it's always a red flag if someone is trying to get you to do something by pointing a finger at someone else, no matter the circumstance. It's just low energy, in my opinion, and you should ask yourself twice whether that person's motivation is truly to help you and not maybe to benefit from your action against the third party. So the quote here from the book is this one: "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." So in the book, Animal Farm, as you will explore, or as you have explored already, there is a bunch of sort of animals, which I guess reminds us of a society of a sort, a certain community. And in that community, the idea sparks to begin with that everyone is equal, right? And we should all fight to be equal together in this new world we're forming. So, of course, the initial path that is pointed out to the participants is this is what we have to do to make our future better. There is always someone out there that we don't appreciate. Maybe it's the oppressor. Usually the narrative is that there is someone oppressing you, which is why maybe it's the rich that are to blame, or maybe it's the powerful, the autocracy, the theocracy, the aristocracy. Maybe it's the farmer, it's the owner, it's whoever, it's the boss. Whoever is pointed out as that one who's to blame gets blamed for your and everyone alike misery. And so the first step to get out of that is, of course, to get rid of those in power those in, whatever circumstances it might be. And an interesting here and, quite dark but important thing to note here is that it often happens that in such states, for example, that's what happened in Poland, when the rule when the country falls prey to this ideology, especially during wartime, the most efficient way to manipulate the country, the best way really to take over the country's leadership is to get rid of anyone who could think for themselves. So, for example, in Poland, throughout the Second World War, when and after, to take care of the opposition of any kind, any sort of intelligent people, mostly doctors, lawyers, teachers, professors, and so forth, they were simply taken out. And I don't want to dwell on this too much. This is hopefully it's in history, but we should not forget. This is the whole point, because if someone comes up with this idea again, and it starts that everyone who's poor is poor because everyone who's rich is rich, then that's just one step away from taking some sort of horrific action against those that have from those that don't. And this is usually the case that the rebellion comes up with, right? So the new normal is established, we can say, and as you will see in the book, new rules, new regulations, new state is emerging. And of course, it's an interesting idea to contend with. If everyone is equal, then who is it to choose who will be ruling us after the new world is established, right? The new state is established. And of course, usually it just comes to pass that it's the same people, same, organizations that started this movement, that are leading it, end up in power later on. And this is where the equality stops being equal, because this illusion of equality is kept as long as it's favorable for those who are manipulating to keep that illusion of equality. If I benefit from convincing you we're equal, so you will run in front of me against the tanks, for example, in a war. So I benefit that I don't die, and you will instead. It might be beneficial for me at the time to claim that I'm equal, but of course, if my intention is to live to see the other day and to lead this movement after the war is over, this is where this equality doesn't really hold. And of course, it's very difficult for people once the mass is moving, since we are herd animals and we do have to have tendencies to act worse in a crowd than we would do on our own, which is an interesting and quite horrific fact about ourselves. It might just so happen that those that led you astray will be the ones oppressing you afterwards. And this is the dark joke of this ideology that usually claims that it's there to benefit those that are not able to take care of themselves, or maybe are worse off than others, that in the long term, if they do end up achieving success, meaning taking away all the power from anyone else and basically having the absolute power over the state, it very quickly becomes the new elite class. And so the true face of this movement is then shown, and it's very quickly corrupted into oppressive structures, because of course, a ruling of any sort demands by definition the ruler and the ruled. And it's a very great idea for everyone to be equal, but in a state, it's very difficult to have an efficient state if we were all to decide on everything all of the time. And so naturally some sort of structure will emerge, and this is just yet another iteration of the same oppressive structure, whatever oppressive structure there might have been before. Now, one thing to note here is that in the process, unfortunately, it is usually the case that in the process of a communistic revolution, it is those individuals, those groups that are most effective, most productive, most, powerful in a sense that they have the most merit behind them, that suffer the most. And therefore, as let's say, if I know that some people might feel uncomfortable dividing the society into a hierarchy of structure, but let's be honest, we're not all the same. Some of us have more success than others. Some of us have more abilities in one thing than the other. And it's only fair that naturally over time, even among your group of friends, if you observe how you grow up with people around you, over time there will be things that you are good at that other people are not. And whatever the things, maybe whatever the wealth, whatever the power, whatever the influence, it is that we should judge each other by and sort of sort ourselves by, there will be some sort of hierarchy there. It's only fair that whoever is best at cooking will have the most success in cooking. Now, what this idea of equality through communism does is it takes out the top by first pointing them out as the problem. And so actually it just lowers the standard of these skills and powers and abilities in the society. Essentially, it makes the society dumber, because if you disincentivize, if you punish people for being smart, if you punish people for being, successful and influential, people have less incentive to be successful, and therefore overall, apart from even that horrific act you might have had to take to get rid of the top, all the others will now recognize that it's better for them not to even try and be successful, because then they would stand up and stand out, and then potentially they would be your next target. Now, one more thing maybe is, before we go to the next topic, I'm just looking for my notes here. One more thing to note maybe is that it is of course my own opinion, and so you might see it otherwise. But I think that this is definitely echoed in 1984, which we've discussed last week. It does seem that government, by its sort of maybe monopoly on power in a given country, in a given state, might have a tendency to centralize this power. Now, what that means is that over time, a government is likely to try and get more and more abilities, powers, and sort of influence under its wings from its citizens. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that it's always bad for the government to have power, but it does mean that over time, if we do consider that all of us are human and we all have human flaws, it is risky to give absolute power to anyone. I wouldn't want to be given an absolute power. hopefully I can, and you can do this experiment with yourself, of course, and have a discussion. This is actually the invitation from Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, to really take a deep, sort of self-reflection on what would you do and how would you act if you were the one in charge. As much as I want to believe that I would be a noble and a good ruler, I have no reason to know that for a fact. And I'm afraid that knowing that I'm just another person and fairly ordinary one, it might just so happen that an absolute power will actually corrupt me absolutely. And so giving centralized control to any political system or institution might over time lead to some sort of troubles. This is basically the totalitarian state. And very similarly, as you will explore in the book, it might happen to a communist regime, that over time more and more control is granted, and therefore more and more control is exercised, and power is expressed. Now, the second part of second theme, let's say, from this book is a very similar, very echoing the previous episode one. It's about the power of propaganda and manipulation. Now, to start off, this is the quote. Squealer, who's one of the characters, was so fat that he needed to move his head to see past his own flanks, but he was still a brilliant talker. Let's take elections into consideration, or even maybe more down to earth. Let's consider what kind of an actor do you appreciate, or maybe what kind of a TV host, maybe what kind of a podcast host do you enjoy. So it just so happens, and I think this is very relevant with the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, so I'll actually link it below as well for all of you who've not listened to that episode yet and read that book yet. It just so happens that we often think through emotions, and we often take into account, when making decisions, many things that we don't think about. So in the way someone expresses themselves, in the way someone even uses their hands, in the way someone articulates, the tone of voice, the way they look, all of these things from a objective standpoint should not matter when you're discussing facts. And yet, in a political discourse, or on a podcast, on a TV show, we tend to rely on them sometimes, oftentimes, even more so than on the facts themselves. It is even more exaggerated as an issue, I would say, as an error, a sort of a bug in our thinking, when it comes to discussions that are heated, or when it comes to topics that are emotional. Because naturally, whenever we feel emotional, we go much more into these emotions and rely on them much stronger, because they sort of take control over us, and we might lose sight of what actually matters, and we might not read between the lines, so to speak. We might not understand the facts. This is the case, the unfortunate but true case with a political discourse. I know from my own experience, and I have no doubt you had that experience at some point too, and if you haven't, then maybe you will. It is very difficult sometimes to convey facts to someone who's truly convinced that they're right. Even more so that there is this phenomena, I don't remember who pointed it out, but there is this phenomenon that actually some people, when offered a set of facts that is fully transparently showing them that they are in the wrong, actually use that as an excuse, as an understanding to go even more, to double down even more, to be more convinced that they are right. Somehow, some error inside, some lapse in judgment enables us to make those mistakes. And this is what a good manipulator, what a good propagandist will take advantage of. Now, as you might know or might not, maybe you've already experienced it in your country, hopefully you haven't. Unfortunately, the propaganda is almost always there. If you think about it, any opinion in a way is propaganda. Of course, that does not mean that every opinion is untrue, because not all propaganda is untrue. But unfortunately, especially in such cases as a totalitarian state, as we saw in 1984, or as a communist regime, as you will explore or you have explored in Animal Farm, propaganda is a central tool for maintaining control by distorting reality. So, a real life example of that is all of this trouble we are having right now, which is greatly exaggerated, I would say, through social media, where there are actually full-on companies out there which are paid for creating misinformation and disinformation. And of course, this is a very big problem, especially that many of the discourse online is actually conducted by bots. So it's not even people arguing and discussing. And if you take into account also what we've discussed about the algorithms, and the fact that the algorithms are pointedly biased to help you enjoy more of the same, then it is very efficient these days with these tools to offer a niche group of people, a certain group of people, a certain content that will further strengthen their beliefs without the actually telling the truth, right? Especially if you're one of the people, I don't think you are because you're listening to this podcast, and I have no doubt you listen to a few others if you do, and you read books, which is, I would say, always a good green flag in our day and age. Many people, unfortunately, take all of the information they take in is based on social media or contemporary television, and if they do so, they are ripe to fall prey to a propaganda and manipulation, and there is a certain agenda being pushed, simply for the reason that the agenda will bring the rulers or whoever is pushing the agenda some sort of an outcome, right? Manipulation is basically getting people to act, to think a certain way for a certain outcome to come to pass. Now, rhetorics and ability to articulate yourself is often used, especially against or maybe for manipulating people over lower status, simply because it just so happen we sometimes believe that an expert, because they talk in expert jargon, is knowledgeable, even though they might just be talking in expert jargon while they're talking complete untrue and silly stuff. Unfortunately, especially if we don't understand what is being told, we might fall prey to this approach of not doubting, but taking it for for something that's true, because we don't know, right? And we might even feel silly about asking about it. Now, even more so in the case of the communist regime, but also in general, I would say, be wary of the fact how history is manipulated. if you think about it, there is this saying, history is written by the victors. I guess, if there is a saying, then there might be a kernel of truth in that. And if you think about it, history is very biased for the simple reason that only those that lived to tell the tale got to tell the tale. And if you think even more so that the majority of the population of our civilization going back was illiterate, then it is very unlikely for us to see a different perspective than that from those who were able to, put in the resources, the intelligence, the literate skills to work to write down what happened. And of course, whoever wins the war, especially if they obliterate the opponent, is very likely to come up with a comfortable description of what happened, simply because it will help propel their agenda forward. Now, this is exactly what's going on in the Animal Farm. As the pigs take more and more control, they basically start controlling the narrative in a very similar manner than in 1984, where it's all directed to ensure compliance and basically to obscure what's true, to suppress whoever is disagreeable with this state, and to to basically get rid of critical thinking. And this is a very important piece, guys, and I kind of feel like I've said it so many times, I don't know, but it's definitely one of those things that, like, if I were to point to one thing that I'm troubled by in the world these days, is we need to have courage to doubt and ask questions, and we need to have courage to read and explore the other side narrative, the other side opinion. Major problems in society, in my opinion, stem from the fact that we all see a very skewed, our side, our point of view reality. We, through social media, we end up living in bubbles, and these bubbles over time basically disable us from being able to think straight. And the less discourse we have about it, the less open we are to discuss these ideas with others, and the less courageous we are to ask questions, the more likely we are to fall prey to some sort of manipulation. And whoever ever forces you or manipulates you into not thinking clearly and critically, not to ask questions, whoever doesn't want you to ask some questions, you should be very wary of that party, because the moment we stop asking questions is the moment that it all goes to hell in a handbasket, as they say. So it's a very, very real problem, I would say, that we should have, I believe we should have more open dialogue with all parties, being able to openly say what they think, and sort of let their ideas fight their battles on this battleground or a marketplace of ideas. And the more we oppress, in my opinion, the more likely we are to be oppressed. So yeah, some as I said, some heavy stuff there, but very approachable, very applicable, not approachable, a very applicable one nonetheless. Now, maybe before I continue, I have a few quotes that are sort of, on a different front, but I wrote them down because they seem to echo some of these ideas, or maybe take them a bit further. One is, true empathy comes from understanding of just how bad people can be. Now, of course, this is echoed in Gulag Archipelago, and this invitation for us to decide for ourselves whether or not, how would we act, and whether or not we wouldn't be that bad person in the room. And I think in particular this really rears its head. I find it very true for me in relation to martial arts, right? So I've been training for some time now, and I've had a fair amount of humbling experiences, being basically demolished by people of all age and size. Sometimes in a manner that made me really, really painful and uncomfortable, and sometimes in a manner that made me a little less uncomfortable and in pain. Nevertheless, it is only when you experience how fragile our bodies are that I believe you start appreciating how fragile our bodies are. It's something that, in general is echoed in this idea that children are innocent because they don't understand the evils of this world, the problems of our existence, right? A child in its innocent years don't really, until it falls off a swing, it doesn't know what it means to fall off a swing. Until it burns its hand on the stove, the child won't know what does it mean. And in a similar way, I think this true empathy that the quote invites us to consider comes from understanding of just how bad people can be, as an invitation to recognize that even the person who did offend you, or even the person who did hurt you, if you really understand just how horrific some human actions are, you become more and more open to empathize and appreciate that person is probably just struggling with something really, really bad. And, this is, of course, not absolving some of their actions, but it definitely allows us to be more empathetic to them, and not falling prey to any aggression or, revenge of some sort. Now, secondly, a second quote here that I wrote down is from Nietzsche, which is basically a criticism of the state in general. Everything that the state says is a lie. Everything that the state has is stolen. This is, of course, a very extreme position for all of you who appreciate your state. But there must be some kernel of truth in it as well. I would not put it past Nietzsche that he did have some thoughts that are worthy of our thought. So I'll just leave it with you, especially in the context of this propaganda machine that the communist regime in Animal Farm offers. I think it's a very big highlight on how this power grab and this manipulation to power grab happens, right? If everything they say is a lie, there must be an end to that mean of lie that they are coming up with. Now, finally, let's turn to our third topic, and then I'll come back to the third quote that I have here. As our third topic, I wanted to explore this idea of betrayal of trust and the corruption of leadership. Now, the quote first is, "No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which." This is the climax of this equality to oppression process, that it might happen that at the very beginning of a revolution, especially if you're participating in one, if you're so unlucky that you do, whoever is manipulating, whoever is in charge, might be using some sort of a mask to mask their true faces. And it just so happens that usually the those that first used your support to gain power to help you end up oppressing you through that power. And this is basically this idea that as the pigs grow more and more strong in the story, they end up appearing more and more like those, like humans, that they sought to take out. They pointed fingers at before as someone who is bad and we should not be like them. In a very similar manner, in the history of dictatorships, I think in general, what you will find if you explore any of the dictatorships of the world is that at the very beginning, the narrative of the dictator might be quite noble, and it might be even noble enough for us to support them. But then as they take over, because of the tendency of the power there is this quote, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you give someone power, you will get to know their true nature. And it just so happens that in this case, in this communist revolution, over time, those in power end up acting and literally being just like those who they were seeming to oppose, right? Until they took over, they were pointing fingers, and when they took over, the fingers pointed at you, and you're being oppressed instead. So, of course, this idea is that those manipulators, those that try to take over, will exploit their authority to basically over time gain more comfort and power, right? And afterwards, as they get to power, as you will explore, especially if you read any of the accounts of how it came up in the Soviet Union, and Gulag Archipelago yet again is a great read for that. And we sort of touched on it a little bit on the podcast. Afterwards, in such states, when this kind of power is, sort of revolutionary enticed, it often happens that those in power end up fighting among themselves as well. And so the distrust just grows. And so not only do those who are oppressed not trust those in charge, but also those in charge do not trust those who are oppressed, and then themselves among one another. So this is where the totalitarian regime starts becoming more and more of a reality. There are some dark jokes about the Soviet state, about the fact that, for example, everyone was, apparently 1 in 4 people were snitches. 1 in 4 people were, providing information to the secret police, the KGB. Which means, if you think about it, that at least one person in a family was a snitch at some point. And of course, it was all because through providing information on others, you were able to somehow manage yourself over time, because you were sort of pointing in different directions so the KGB wouldn't come for you. And this oppressive vigilance by self-vigilance really is I would argue, the worst type of totalitarian state, because not only the cameras outside or the banks and the government is looking into what you do, it's also your family members, your friends that are likely to snitch on you were you to do something that is seen out of line. And that's a truly horrific scenario, don't you think? Now, before we maybe wrap up, something that this quote reminds me of, which is why I'm going to share it with you and then sort of explore it a bit further, is you know how during the pandemic, the initial announcement, I don't know how it was in your country, but in my country of staying in Wales, the initial announcement was that we are going to go home for 2 weeks, right? And we're going to resume work in 2 weeks. And of course, we all know how then it happened. We ended up going home for more or less a year. Maybe some of you had to go home for longer than a year. And there is this quote, "There is nothing more permanent than a temporary government solution." I know that this is not a rule, so, don't quote me on this as, oh, Wojtek thinks every government uses that all of the time. But I am wary of just how true it might be. How often do we hear from those in charge that there is a certain temporary solution that could be applied that will help us in the short term, and then of course in the meantime they will be working on a long-term solution? Now, taking it out of politics and the state, I'm just going to talk about life, right? About our experience. It doesn't seem right for me to put reliance on short-term solution without first taking steps already, to act upon the problem at hand long term. Because in a way, it seems to me that we are disincentivized, we are less likely to pursue a long-term solution if it's more uncomfortable after the short-term solution is already being applied. Because, for example, let's say that you're having trouble with, some sort of health issues may be related to your style of eating, your quality of eating, whatnot. While short-term solution might, help you not feel as bad every day as you used to before, if the short-term solution does not address the root of the problem, essentially it just postpones your need to act upon that root of the problem, right? It's like the painkillers. This is what I think about when I think about these. If something hurts, and maybe, like myself, I recently had a dentist appointment and one of my teeth got drilled in, and now it sort of hurts a little bit still for the past week. Of course, that's normal, right? Like, I can expect there to be pain because I had someone drill into that tooth and put some filling in. It's very different if I have a certain pain somewhere in my body and I don't know what it is. I could, as a short-term solution to get rid of the symptom, just take some painkillers which are off the shelf. You can literally go to the shop and buy them without any knowledge whatsoever about what's going on. And I could be okay, right? I could literally take that painkiller set every day for the next however many days I want, really. And essentially, it seems like I fixed the problem, right? But of course I didn't. If the problem is that I have some sort of a medical emergency within me that I need to address, and pain is obviously an alarm mechanism for us to know that something is not right. If I'm numbing that pain, then essentially I'm just making myself worse because I'm prolonging my action to do something. That's how I see temporary solutions in general. And so coming back to this idea that there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government solution, it does seem to me that whenever someone starts talking about a short-term solution that doesn't treat the root of the problem and says that they will work on the long-term solution in the meantime, my alarm goes off inside my brain, saying something along the lines of like, watch out, because maybe that temporary solution is not exactly there to solve the problem in the first place. Maybe it's just a distraction or a power grab of sort. Who knows? But of course, the invitation here from the Animal Farm is to keep fairly reasonably distrustful of leadership and institutions, right? Because as much as there are many people that wish you well in the world, I'm afraid there are also many people out there who might not. And you should know about it. There is no useful, utility in you pretending that's not the case, right? Maybe just the fact that for whatever reason you like the ignorance is bliss quote. But of course, as I said again and again, if you are listening to this podcast, you're unlikely to be one of those people that just want to be ignorant. So be courageous to doubt. Don't worry, and don't hesitate to doubt and to look for information on your own. Now, after talking about this for almost an hour now, my invitation for you for this week, of course, is to read the book. It's a fairly short one, so I think you could easily squeeze it in a few days. If you've not read it before, I think it's a must. Certainly because of, communist topics and approaches still being propagated across the world anyway, which really worries me, but here we are. Educate yourself, basically. And I will leave you with this question, because this is usually what it all comes down to. Usually the narrative from any sort of communism inspired ideas is that we should all chip in so those who don't have will have more, and we should all be equal, right? This is the narrative there. We should all be equal. Now, my perspective on this maybe, and the question here for you is, consider how comfortable you would feel with dividing all you earn through hard work and sharing it forcefully, you have no choice, with those that did not want to work at all. So imagine a scenario in which, whatever you earn in a month, at the end of the month when you get your paycheck, you see that half of that paycheck has been sent to some other person who is registered as they don't work, and they chose not to work. They prefer not to. They enjoy doing other stuff, maybe sitting on the couch or whatnot. I'll just leave you with that. I don't want to share here my thoughts on this. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. So maybe have a think and let me know in the comment below, or maybe send me an email. We have many more episodes in this series, in this season, to explore these ideas, and we will definitely come back to this idea of sharing your fruit of your labor with others in more or less equal nature. And so I'm just wondering, I don't want to give you my point of view simply because I kind of hope that this is one of those topics that each of us should explore on their own. And I guess there is no wrong answer to this one. You should really think it through and consider, and maybe this will inspire you and inform you on your next adventure of some sort, or on your next election night when you're choosing some of your leaders. So yeah, thank you so much for going through this with me. I know this was quite a heavy topic. As I said, I think we should talk about these things, and these are books that are classics for a reason. So we should not forget. We should educate ourselves, and we should explore these ideas. Yet again, as I said, there are no adverts on this podcast for a reason. And so if you do appreciate my work, please subscribe. Make sure to click that subscribe button, and as well, share it with a friend. Follow me on social media, send me an email or message, a pat on the back, maybe suggest a book that I should explore. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate your time. So thank you so much for your time, for your energy. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.